food security and climate, specifically the International 4p1000 initiative. And I want to thank everybody and welcome everybody for joining us today. This webinar is being hosted by Sierra Club's Food and Agriculture Grassroots Network team, which focuses on agriculture policies and practices, and healthy soil and food, which is consistent with the 4p1000 initiative. So we're working on very similar issues. We would really love to thank Paul LUU of the 4p1000 initiative. He's one of the leaders, and he is he was really gracious and recorded a video for us to listen to. So we want to thank him very much for his recording the video. During the video, which is a large part of our webinar today, he will be sharing with us what the initiative is and how it works. And then most importantly, he will be helping us to figure out how can we work together to help solve this issue, of our awful issue that's going on of climate change through healing our soil and then using regenerative agriculture practices. The basic flow of our webinar is that I will be doing the brief introduction, which is what I'm doing right now. We will be having a video recording, like I mentioned. It's about 20 minutes in length. And then we will have a discussion about what the status is right now of the 4p1000 initiative. Unfortunately, our team member, Paul McCullough, was not able to attend, so Klaus will be taking over for him. Then we will be doing a Q&A, which Julia Lowe will be hosting. And so again, for anybody who has questions, please note them in the chat function, and we will go ahead and address them as time permits. And then finally, one of the most important parts of our webinar is Klaus talking about what actions we can take, because that's important. Like, how can we work together to help solve this issue of climate change using soil health and agriculture policies? One of the things that I actually am fascinated with and I love is soil health. It's for those of you, I'm just going to give a brief introduction about soil. The soil is hugely important to our life on this earth. It helps regulate the water cycle. It's also it's important in stabilizing our climate because it's actually the largest terrestrial sink. And so through photosynthesis, it actually the soil draws carbon out of the atmosphere and then converts it into carbohydrates and then uses it for food and all kinds of things under the earth. But the soil function is related to the soil health. So that's one of the reasons it's hugely important that we keep our soil healthy. The concern that's occurred over the last 150 years is that we've actually had a tremendous loss of topsoil and organic matter. I know for me, both my parents lived through the Dust Bowl, so that was primarily, it was responsible, was for an extended drought, but also a huge loss of topsoil was responsible for that. And then the other thing to think about is, I think I mentioned it, but the function of soil is related to its health. So degraded soil, for instance, actually contributes to climate change by releasing carbon into the atmosphere, as opposed to really healthy soil draws down carbon. So that's a reason to keep your soil healthy. Then the other thing to consider is these days, I think, I know I'm pretty scared right now with all of the climate change and unprecedented climate changes we've been seeing, like the fires in Australia during their summer, I thought was just really heartbreaking. So again, the whole point of this is just, storing carbon in soils can help draw down excess carbon, and it's one of the elements of ways that we can mitigate the climate issue that we're seeing today. The the main focus of our webinar is to talk about and share with you the 4p1000 initiative, what it is, what it's all about, how it came about, which it started it was adopted at the end of the 2015 Paris Climate Change Conference. And the overall objective was to increase soil carbon by 4% per year, or 0.4% per year, and as a way to offset, the carbon emissions that result from fossil fuel emissions. And the way to do this, of course, is to help rebuild the agriculture system. Because of all the degraded land, there's a lot of opportunity to use that land and regenerate it for a number of reasons, but one is to help draw down carbon and reduce the atmospheric carbon levels. So again, we can do all this working together, and I think it's very exciting, actually. So now I'm going to turn the webinar over, and we are going to watch the video that Paul LUU recorded. So we want to thank him very much for contributing. The video was recorded mainly because he's in France and it was a time difference. And also I want to thank very much Alex Baden-Mayer, who's with our Sierra Club Virginia chapter, but also she is a political director of Organic Consumers Association, and she worked with Paul in recording this video. So we want to thank her very much. And now I will pass over, let's see, I need to pass this over.
I've got it.
You got it?
Mm-hmm.
I have to stop sharing. Okay.
All right. Someone speak up if you can't hear the volume on this for whatever reason. I think I have the settings right.
Hello, everybody. I'm Paul LUU, the Executive Secretary of the 4p1000 initiative, and I'm very sorry not to be with you today due to difference of time between France and the US, but I propose that I recorded my presentation and then you will be able to benefit of it while I will sleep. So allow me to switch my screen in order to present to you what I would like to share. So I would like to explain to you what is the objective of the 4p1000 initiative and why is it so important for us to develop this initiative worldwide. So if we look at the data provided by the scientists, we can see that the agriculture today is already represented, and all related activity is already represented 25% of the global greenhouse gas emission. Not only, of course, direct agriculture, but also all what's happened before the agriculture took place and also what's happened after. This is what we call the contribution of the 4p1000 sector, agriculture, forestry, and land use sector. So the agricultural sector would be the first contributor in greenhouse gas emission in 2050. And from 25% today, it will go up to 50% in 2050. That is why we have to work on it through agriculture mainly. So it was just a small introduction. And we can also consider some other factors. The world population is growing, and unfortunately, the rate of the decreasing number of undernourished is not so high that the population is increasing. So it means that we have more and more population on Earth, and the number of people that are suffering from undernutrition is decreasing also, but not at a comparable rate to disappear. The second point is that the agriculture is also criticized due to the fact that, as I previously said, all the other economic sector commit to reduce their GHG emission, while the agriculture has not yet really commit to decrease the emission. So it means that we will have to work on that very, very soon, and even now. Third point, we all notice that the climate change is really already ongoing, and that we need to adapt the agriculture and forestry to this ongoing climate change. If not, we will be in trouble for food security in a short while. To summarize what I just said, we have to act on GHG emission at all levels and in all sectors, including agriculture and forestry. We have to adapt agriculture and forestry to climate change, because this one is already ongoing. And we have to ensure food security that will be otherwise strongly impacted by climate change. Fortunately, we can do that through one thing, namely soils. And we also can do that through one action, carbon sequestration or carbon storage. Why is it so important to store carbon in soil? Then if you remove carbon from the atmosphere, you will attenuate or mitigate the climate change, so you will attenuate GHG emission, and you can do that for decades, even to millennia, if you are doing the proper practices. So the also very important thing is that you are doing that through the photosynthesis, which is the most efficient, low-cost negative emission technology to capture CO2 in the atmosphere. It's also important to store carbon in soil because it helps agriculture to adapt to climate change. When you increase the soil organic matter, you will increase also the capacity of the soils to have a water retention, and you also decrease the sensitivity of soils to erosion. So those two factors are very important to help the agriculture adapt to climate change, drought, or even flood. It's also important to contribute to food security and restore degraded soils through the carbon storage. Why? Because we all know that when you increase the soil organic matter content in a soil, you increase also the soil fertility. But this will also increase soil yield, stability. And of course, finally, when you store organic matter in soil, then you will also help restoring the degraded soils. So just come back on a short sequestration mechanism in soil, just a small sketch. This is very important to understand that because it helps also understand how we can sequester carbon in soil and how also you can release the carbon in the atmosphere. So the plants are capturing the CO2 with the photosynthesis process, with the energy of the sun. And this, when the plant and the animal with the plant just died, come back to the soil. This is what we call the fresh organic matter. So the first thing that happened, it's a primary mineralization. It means that the organic matter will decompose and will give birth to a lot of gas that will be emitted in the atmosphere. But fortunately, a big part of this organic matter will also contribute to the humification and the transformation in the soil in humus. This humus is a more stable way to hold organic matter in soils. While this is not also perfect because part of this humus will also have a mineralization, the secondary mineralization, that will release also some gas in the atmosphere. But fortunately, some of those gas with the plant, with the fungus, with the life in the soil will be reorganized and come back to the humus. So you can see that this is a kind of balance where you have a process capturing CO2 in the atmosphere with the plants, and also all the process in the soil that are also releasing CO2, CH4, NO2 in the atmosphere that are contributing also as greenhouse gas and also changing the climate change. So the difficulty is that we are working on the balance and the biologic phenomena. On this sketch, I tried to explain, it's not my one, of course I borrow it to Ratan Lal. In fact, when we are in the system that are naturally balanced, we could consider that we are at the level of the 100 on the left part of the sketch. And when we start making agriculture, we start decreasing the relative soil carbon pool, and we are going down along to the red, towards the red part of this sketch. So fortunately, sometimes agriculture is maintaining a kind of new equilibrium, but this is not very satisfactory because we are low behind the naturally balanced level. What we can do when you are starting storage and sequestration through the proper practices, you are going to the pink area. That means that the rate of carbon is starting to increase again. And if the proper practices are developed, then you can even go to the green area, where the objective could be to come back to the 100 line situation, where it was the natural balance level. Well, we can always imagine that in the future, using specific technology or specific practices, we will be able to go further and maybe go over that soil saturation. But this is just a dream at the moment. At the moment, if we can go to the pink area, that will be very good. And if we go to the green area, that will be even a very, very important step. So the goal of the 4p1000 initiative in all this context is, as you can understand, increase carbon sequestration in soil as organic matter for a triple objective: increasing food security, adapting agriculture to climate change, mitigate climate change, and also, of course, all of those pursuing the objective of sustainable development adopted by the United Nations. But just stop 2 minutes on the name of the 4p1000 initiative, where this name, this funny name, is coming from. Well, it's just a very basic calculation, what we could call a back of the envelope calculation made by some scientists, crazy one maybe, most probably. But anyway, it was very interesting. Because those scientists consider all the emission, the global emission due to the human activity, that could be transportation, energy, industry, agriculture, deforestation. And every year, this conducts to a release in the atmosphere of roughly 10 gigatons of carbon per year. Fortunately, the natural vegetation and the ocean are able to recapture part of this gas, a little bit more than half, which is not too bad, but not enough. And every year, I would say at the end of the day, but not only at the end of the year also, the net fluxes of GHG emission, I mean the carbon equivalent emission in the atmosphere, is plus 4.3 gigatons that are going to increase the quantity of carbon in the atmosphere. But most of the people ignore that soils are richer in carbon than the atmosphere, 2 to 3 times, and that we can maybe do something on this carbon. And if you compare the quantity of carbon in the topsoil, the 30 to 40 centimeter, that means roughly 900 gigatons of carbon. If you compare that figure to the plus 4.3 gigaton of carbon, then you can make a simple calculation that at an annual increase of 0.4% of the world soil surface carbon stock, then we could compensate the annual CO2 increase in the atmosphere due to the human activity. And 0.4% is equivalent, is what in French we call 4p1000, and so that is why we we use this name for the initiative. The 4p1000 initiative today is quite a large group of all stakeholders. We have almost 450 signatories to become a partner of the initiative, and you can see that we have almost 50 countries and provinces, 13 international organizations and so on, farmers organization, enterprise, NGOs, research education body, and so on. Some of those partners, almost half, signed the second declaration of intention that in order to become a member and to be part of the decision of the initiative. It has to be noted that the enterprise are not allowed to become a member because we don't want to have an influence from the private business in the decision that will be taken within the initiative. The chairman of this initiative is Dr. Ibrahim Mayaki from Niger, and the vice chair is Stéphane Le Foll from France. Well, all what we propose in the initiative, in fact, is to push all the stakeholders, and mainly, of course, the farmers, to go towards agroecology and to use agroecology. So just to give you an idea of what we would like to promote, I just draw that sketch and I will explain to you while I will build it and why is it so important. Our society today wanted us to use less and less mineral fertilizer and phytosanitary products. And they also wanted to have an increased biodiversity, or at least maintain the biodiversity, but if we can increase. And of course, the carbon sequestration in soil, also because it's important to fight climate change, as I said before. Today, with the conventional agriculture, we are here. We are in a place where we are using a lot of fertilizer and also phytosanitary products, and we are a low soil organic carbon. We are decreasing soil organic carbon because soil are eroding, and we are also a low biodiversity. So what we want to do is try to mimic the nature. That's why it's so important to also follow the natural move today of natural-based solution. We want to get an inspiration through the natural forestry ecosystem and using the agroecology to have an evolution from the conventional agriculture to a more ideal system. On the way, we can find the conservation agriculture, we can find organic agriculture, but maybe even better, some regenerative agriculture, holistic grazing system, and for some system, we can reach the agroforestry system with a lot of trees in those cropping systems that could really mimic the natural forestry ecosystem. So that's what we promote through the 4p1000 initiative, how we can go from the conventional agriculture to a more adequate system to help us developing agroecology. What we also want to promote is the fact that the one who are doing the job at the end of the day are the farmers and the forester. I should say forester as well. Those people need to be placed in the center of the game. And they are not the only one to act. Of course, we are in a society. You have the civil society with the consumer, with the NGOs. We have also the policymaker. We have the international organization, the scientists, the agro-food business. And all those people have some influence on the farmers. And also the farmers can have some influence on the civil society that delivering some food and some other services, natural environment services. So that I try to figure out, simplify in this yellow arrow. But the farmers would like also to get access to some information. They said that they need to have more and more information. And in order to help them, we need to build a database on good practices according to agro-pedoclimatic area and production system. Practices that could be compatible, of course, with the agroecology and the movement, the trend that we want to promote. Then, to finish that sketch, you need also to have all the wish, all the interaction that the farmers or the other have in between each other. And you can see that each stakeholder tried to influence other one in a way to have a better positioning, I would say, of the producer and also of the whole society. Attention, if you want to get more information, so do not hesitate to go on our website. We have already opened a collaborative platform, shifting to a new collaborative platform that is really made for a true collaboration. So be patient, and we need to have more and more people joining the initiative. This is free of charge, so do not hesitate in your structure organization to join us. Thank you again for your attention.
Sorry, I'll just hopping back into the Zoom, which, alrighty.
Okay, Eric, are you ready? Did we lose Eric again? Okay, how about I'll take the screen then?
I'm not enabled. If you've got it, have
All right.
Hillary. Oh, you've got it. Okay, good.
Yeah, let me take it from here then.
Good.
Okay, well, first of all, wanted to thank you to Paul LUU for sharing this information with us, and I wanted to also call out how we are so thankful and appreciative for his efforts to put this into an international focus. And you look at how many countries and organizations have already signed up with him. I wanted to give a little background about how did the Sierra Club get into this? How did this decision come about? And so from a historic perspective, agriculture really changed dramatically after World War II, and the invention of synthetic nitrogen fertilizer has made with natural gas and pesticides made from natural oil, have really changed dramatically, revolutionized agriculture and increased yields enormously. It has supported a population increase in my lifetime, from 2.4 billion people in 1950 to 3 billion in 1960 to 6 billion in the year 2000, and now we're at 7.7 billion people. So it has done, you could argue, a lot of really good things. It has facilitated the consolidation of farms. It has enabled very large monocrop practices, which have created benefits of scale that allowed the application of industrial processes. You could buy huge equipment, very efficient logistics processes, manufacturing processes, and so on. Then there comes this, however, over a period of several decades, it has become apparent that using these chemicals to drive productivity in a natural system has caused some pretty severe externalities. It has caused environmental degradation. It can roughly be categorized as environmental degradation, public health and animal welfare, and then becoming back to carbon sequestration. So talking about the environmental degradation here, and just to cite a few examples, this is by no means a comprehensive part here, but plowing using synthetic nitrogen, using pesticides have collectively caused a global degradation of topsoil. We have lost about 1/3 of global topsoil in the last 40 years. Once topsoil is dead, the soil organic matter dies off, it turns into sand basically, and it flows off, it washes out. No topsoil, no food. Scientists are arguing that we have maybe 60 more years of topsoil left. It is unfathomable how we are drifting into the future here. Synthetic nitrogen fertilizer runoff causes enormous algae blooms in dead zones in lakes, rivers, and the oceans. You can in fact see that from outer space, where satellite images can record algae blooms in Lake Erie, around Florida coastlines, in the Gulf of Mexico, at the runoff from the Amazon River, enormous algae blooms that are sucking the oxygen out of the oceans and are killing off the aquatic life. Aquifers are being pumped beyond their natural replenishment rate, putting high volumes of crops at risk. And you just think of the Oglala aquifer in the US, feeding so many regions. You look at California, but also Indonesia, China, India are all pumping down their aquifers beyond their replenishment rate. Once these are dry, that would have catastrophic impacts on crop volumes. Our oceans are being overexploited. That's a topic all on its own. But just consider that 2 billion people on the planet depend on the oceans for their protein. We are overfishing way beyond the regenerative capacity of the individual fish stocks. So the big topic here, personal public health and animal welfare, and these are again just some highlights. The loss of organic matter in the soil has degraded the nutritional value of food. Almost 2 billion people suffer from nutrient deficiency, mostly due to a combination of diets, such as processed foods and sugary drinks and so on. But combined with the loss of nutrient value in food, we have this completely unique, historically unique phenomena where hundreds of millions of people are obese and at the same time hungry, at the same time nutrient deficient. And we're talking about empty calories that are being consumed. Chemicals used in farming are bleeding into the food supply. Again, something that the population is not really conscious of. I mean, there are measurable traces. Mother Jones commissioned a study. There are measurable traces of glyphosate found in the breast milk of mothers, in urine samples of the general population. There is glyphosate in all kinds of food that tests positive, in children's cereal, for example. Growth hormones and antibiotics used in animal husbandry transfer into the human food chain. That again is a topic that deserves a much greater focus when you think about CAFOs, concentrated animal feeding operations, and the damage they do on their own, but also what that means to the way we raise animals. I think our time will be remembered for this enormous cruelty that is really inherent in the way that we treat sentient animals for our food. Let me just throw in for a moment here if you have any questions, I will talk for a couple more minutes and then we are going into a question and answer session. So please type your questions into the chat box and Julie is going to catch that and we'll get into a discussion. The last item here, I don't want to repeat the things that Paul LUU was just explaining at great length, but what I want to highlight here, there is really no viable alternative at the scale of land use to sequester carbon out of the atmosphere. Today we have, 415 or so ppm of CO2e in the atmosphere. It is way beyond any level that has ever been in the atmosphere since humans are on the planet. We used to be below 300, 285 to 300 ppm. We're now at 415. So the heat load that is continuing to come into the planet, much of it absorbed by the oceans, is simply not sustainable. We have to pull that carbon back down. And the only place to really put it is into the soil. So while there are a number of schemes and ideas to apply technology to do that, none of them are viable in any sense. Either for technical reasons, financial reasons, or they're untested and they may have side effects that we're not aware of. So the Sierra Club and Agriculture grassroots team, for all of these reasons, decided to join the 4p1000 initiative. And I want to call out Paul McCullough, who was supposed to do this part here, because he's also the driver for the club to have signed us up, and he pushed, you know, for a lot of time it took to get this all achieved here, and so thank you, Paul, for doing that. There is, we will send you this PowerPoint here at the end, and there are links that help you to find more background information. But when you look at NGOs, we are in really good company here with the club and organizations that we are partnering with here to deal with this particular topic. I just also wanted to spend, you know, one moment to talk about that soil doesn't just restore nature, it also restores community. Because when you think about it, the first step that we have to take to restore soil back to health is to treat soil at a local level, at a regional level. Because restoring soil means something different in California than it does in Kansas or in Florida. So we have to localize our efforts to work with soil. That means, you know, you're using unique seeds, you may use different crop types, and that depends on the local condition of the soil, it depends on local climate, it depends on the availability of water, and it depends on socioeconomic conditions, that like the availability of labor, that or logistics access, and so on. So doing that, this decentralization forces local community to step up and develop supporting structures. It's an enormous challenge, but it also is going to restore our community. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Julie to get into a question and answer session. And Julie, do we have some questions already?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, we do. We have several questions. And in the chat, Alexis is helping us answer in the chat box, so that's great. But if you want Klaus just to describe what 4 per 1,000 means, that's the #1 question. And I admit that when I first started being interested in this, it took me a while to understand what 4 per 1,000 is. So if you wouldn't mind, Klaus, just describing that, explaining that.
Sure. So the argument here is that if by using regenerative practices, so for example, not plowing the field because plowing disturbs the organic matter in the soil, by using cover crops because legumes, for example, and other cover crops bring nitrogen into the soil through their root system. So if we deploy these processes and add 0.4% organic matter into the soil each year, then we can achieve the impacts that Paul LUU was talking about. So there are probably more questions about what is regenerative agriculture, but it basically means to stop disturbing the soil. So there are farmers who are now using low-till or no-till practices. That is one issue, and the other one would be the use of cover crops. Those are the two really big ones. Crop rotations are important because each crop uses different nutrients out of the soil. So as we put in the same crop over and over, as is being done now in the industrial agriculture, it takes the same nutrients out, completely depletes the soil, turns it into sand. Does it hopefully make sense? So it is through agricultural practices, re-stimulating organic growth, organic matter into the soil.
Thank you. We have another question. Klaus, I'll just go ahead and ask you, how, if at all, does the warming atmosphere affect the ability of the soil to absorb CO2?
You know, that's beyond me, to be very honest. I'm not a farmer and not a scientist. I know we have some guys on the chat here who would know this, but I honestly that is beyond me here. I'm sorry.
Okay.
But we will follow up because the questions that we haven't been able to answer directly here, we will catch up with you.
Yes, and I have tagged that for follow-up. I don't know if Alexis could answer. If not, we'll just go to the next question. And I have a couple of suggestions. They're not questions and they're good. Mark suggests reading the book Dirt to Soil by Gabe Brown, which I definitely keep. It's not dog-eared because I don't do that, but I have highlighted it and marked it and, you know, bookmarks all through it. It is a great book. And then another suggestion is Kiss the Ground. It's a great resource, says Barbara. And then Anne, if you want to answer this one from Lynn, it says, I question the assumption that, I think it's supposed to say monoculture. I question the assumption that monoculture is good. We know it has degraded the quality of the soil. So maybe just some clarification.
Hi, this is Anne. Yeah, I agree with you, actually. I think that the diversity is what we're aiming for. So diversity in plants, so that you bring in like pollinators, and sometimes, and there's plants, you know, that help each other. There's plants that, you know, don't help each other. So I mean, I agree with you. I think diversity is what we're aiming for, if that helps. Hopefully that helps answer your question. But I agree with you. And I also wanted to say one quick thing about resources or books. And, you know, we can certainly provide you with a list of resources after this webinar, because there's a lot of wonderful books out there that we can help provide. So we'll go ahead and do that, okay?
Okay, thanks, Anne. And since you brought that up, now would be a good time to, we will also include a fact sheet, a regenerative agriculture fact sheet that our team has made up. It's a great resource, so we'll include that after the webinar also. Now our next question is from Catherine, and no, it's not, sorry. It is from T. Which has the potential to be more effective, carbon farming or planting trees? I have doubts about planting lots of trees that will take years to grow. Anne, do you want to take this one?
Sure. I think that's a great question. It's really a good question, because you hear a lot of things now about just plant trees. And you know, it absolutely depends on your ecosystem. So one of the areas that's best in terms of drawing down carbon is your prairie, right? Where you had the buffalo grazing. And that's prairie land. And trees probably aren't the best option there. The best option is it's a grassland, and so it has a very different ecosystem. So I think that's what you have to take into account, is what's the natural ecosystem, and what are the, you know, what's the native plants that grow there. For instance, in a prairie, you don't have enough water for it to be a forest. So, you know, it's that kind of thing. So hopefully that helps answer.
Thanks, Anne.
Mm-hmm.
Another question from George, and this was answered in chat by Alexis, and it's a really good answer. And I don't think she's available to speak live, but the question is from George, and it says, has an independent science panel analysis been conducted on the science of 4p1000? And if you'll just, and it's a good question, so if everybody will just refer to chat when they can to get the response from Alexis, it's very good. And Then we have a question from Annie. And then Klaus, I had you down for this, but let me just read the question. And what we had decided to do, because it's a big question, is to direct people to the Regeneration International website. And that's one of the links that we'll include. What are some things that people can do to increase soil carbon and fight climate change? So
Yeah.
it's a broad question, but Klaus, if you want to
Yeah,
respond.
we have addressed a few items already about this, but there are some great reference material already that has been in the chat box here. My easy answer here is go to Regeneration International's website, because doing regenerative organic agriculture is not just like a homogeneous one thing meets all things. I mean, you have different types of farmers, different types of operations, different crops, and so on. So it gets very technical very fast. So broad-based, it means that you go into a low plow or no plow, you use cover crops, and you rotate your crops. That's the sort of big picture answer here. But then it gets really technical, and there are some exciting, very simple to understand books for the layman, and we will send you some links to those materials.
Okay, thanks, Klaus. If this is about diversity, agroforestry, permaculture practices, would it be safe to say that will be more, wow, this is a long one, sorry. Okay, let me skip or get back to that question when I can read the whole thing. I can't see the field. And then Klaus, there's a question from Chuck that says, what is your view of GMOs, good or bad?
GMOs can be good and can be bad. If genetic editing, for example, is being used, then that is really an advanced form of selective breeding. But if we are talking about the insertion of a virus into a gene, and we are crossbreeding species, then that's really a horrible thing to do, to release those into nature with completely unforeseeable consequences. So it depends on what type of GMO we're talking about.
Right, thank you. And then Anne, if you want to take this question from Dave, no-till is currently widely practiced and involves using herbicides to kill weeds. In place of plowing, the old way of killing weeds, how do we avoid glyphosate? Are you?
There we go. I had to unmute. I think if I understand the question, I think it's the regenerative agriculture is a system, and so it's what I alluded to earlier, which is with biodiversity. So when you have a really healthy ecosystem and you don't till, then so the ecosystem sort of takes care of itself. It's beneficial toward itself. There is a process, however, if you're if you're transitioning, if you're a conventional farmer, let's say, and you're transitioning into regenerative agriculture, there is a process that it takes. You have to transition from a system that's sort of degraded and doesn't necessarily have all of the the insects and the plant life to that kind of all work together. So, and that takes a while. And that is what actually one of the challenges right now is with farmers, is how do we help them to make that transition, assuming they're interested. But the bottom line, I think, is if you have a really healthy system, then you don't really need the pesticides or the fertilizers.
Thanks, Ann. That's a good segue for our next question from Hannah. What are the suggestions to provide the labor, resources, and equipment costs that will be imposed upon farmers to adapt to recommended BMPs? Klaus, did you want to answer that?
Yeah, and in fact, maybe we can transition into the next phase because I'm actually getting into exactly that topic.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I think we're also at the time point. So Eric, can you shift the screen over to the next slide?
And we will get back to everyone that asked questions eventually after the webinar.
So Eric is not there. Yeah. So first of all, I wanted to say thank you for everyone's questions and participation here. And I also wanted to recognize that we have members from a number of our partner organizations on here, Regeneration International aligned groups. So thank you very much for joining and participating. And we hope we can make this an ongoing conversation. Can you go to the next slide, Eric? So what we wanted to make us aware of, and I think in the nature of your questions have already revealed this, food is a really complex adaptive system. It impacts every facet of our economy. And driving change really requires the active participation of every participant. So on the one side, we have consumers who are looking for food that is free of chemicals and that's organically grown. On the other side, we have farmers who really want to get out of this industrial system because they know they're destroying their topsoil, they're destroying their farm. And in the middle is a supply chain that is having a really hard time to adapt and change, to connect this farmer with this consumer. And so that's something we really need to think about in order to facilitate this change. Can you go to the next slide? So what we really have to come to grips is that we're now using more resources than the earth can provide. So like a bank account, you know, that pays out, I'm sorry. My phone is unfortunately linked with my computer here. It's like a bank account that pays out interests on its capital. You know, we are drawing from nature what she can reproduce. And if we go beyond her regenerative capacity, then we're starting to withdraw capital. So like with our bank account, when we draw down capital, there will be less interest in the next year than we had the year before. And that's really what we're doing with our natural resources. So next slide. So there is an organization called Earth Overshoot Day. You may want to go online and check them out. And they track the time of the year where we will have used more from nature than the planet can renew in the whole year. So in 2018, that was August 1. So these calculations, you know, are based on withdrawals, like I'm writing down here 90% of global fish stocks are either fully fished or overfished already. Aquifers are being pumped down. You know, we have lost our topsoil, as we discussed before already. So then this date, August 1, calculates to an overdraw factor of 1.7. So we're using 1.7 planets with today's 7.7 billion people. The problem, of course, is twofold. One is by 2030, we're supposed to be at 8.6 billion people. By 2050, at 9.8 billion. And in the meantime, countries like China, like India, Indonesia, where the population is gaining more middle-class access to a better life, they also want to increase the quality of their food, meaning they're looking for animal protein. So obviously, we're moving into a really bad place. Next slide, please. So when you look at this, if someone asks the question, what is the world going to look like in 10 years, in 20 years, in 30 years from now? Well, the answer is we don't know. Or we can't tell what it will be until we know what we're going to do, because it depends is the answer. So right now, we're pretty much on worst case scenario when you're listening to the scientists. Group of over 1,000 scientists a few weeks ago released second warning to humanity. If we keep going on current trajectory, we will be in a really bad place, not in some distant future, but within the lifetime of most of us on this call here. Our range of intervention will determine how far we can push this line down towards a best case scenario. Probably difficult to reach best case, but at least we will be improving our lot here. Next slide, please. So not to repeat the whole thing, but regenerative organic agriculture obviously builds organic matter in soil, increases yield per acre, restores life and habitats, and so on. But most importantly here, it buys us time that we need to shift out of fossil fuels into clean energy, agroforestry, and energy efficiency. So next slide, please. Then we need to recognize that the transition away from industrial agriculture will deeply impact a $1 trillion industry. It will have global effects. Some business models, particularly in the fast food and snack industry, may just be unable to adjust. Now, that's, when you think about the Industrial Revolution turning the 19th to the 20th century, many companies were left behind, and with the invention of the combustion engine and the steam engine, we are really in a transition that is equally impactful as it was then, and it's in digital time and fast forward. So different companies will deploy different schemes to survive, but let's face it, some will experience enormous stress to adjust their system. So next slide, please. Eric, are you there? Oh, sorry. Farmers need, so how can we help? What can we do? And this is really, the core reason why we wanted to chat today here. Farmers need financial support. They need to invest into different types of equipment. They need to deal with a temporary reduction in yields because it takes like 3 to 5 years to convert the system over. They need access to markets, and preferably through the active engagement and collaboration across the supply chain. Hopefully, and I know we will, find companies that are ready to partner, that are ready to engage, and are looking for markets to satisfy. And particularly when you think that we now have $2 trillion to invest in this most incredible time that we experience right now. If that money was to be misallocated, it would be a catastrophe. So we have to really focus on the political process to support farmers in this adaptation, and we have to make sure everyone understands, because concern, of course, is that many of these decisions on how to invest are being made by people who don't believe the science. So that is existential, really, as an issue we need to think about. So we're doing this by educating the public, tell others about the benefits of regenerative organic farming, support farmers and producers, ask for local products. We as consumers have enormous power over on the demand side, and ask your grocery store, your caterer, to put local brands, the brands that you are trusting, that you're familiar with, to put those on the shelf and on the menu. So next slide. So now we are coming to the end here, and what we would really like to do is continue this conversation, stay connected, exchange ideas, and coordinate initiatives across a broader platform, because we have to approach this from many different perspectives and from many different angles. this means something different to every individual participant, and it has to become personal in the way that we understand this problem to deal with. So next slide. So you know, we're right on time here. Thank you for joining. You know, we will send you the PowerPoint slides. We'll send a link to the webinar itself within the next few days. And for Sierra Club members and chapters, please join the Grassroots Network, log in, click on Teams to find the agriculture and food team, join us, partner with us, help us to develop a structure that we can work with, and where we can support you, you can support us. And so for specific questions, please contact either Ann Stauffer or Annie Belt. They're ready to take your questions and provide you with follow-up and answers. And so again, thank you. We are out of time. Very much appreciate your participation, and we have to sign off. So if everybody wants to unmute for a moment and say bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much.
Forward to hearing from you.